Chapter 13 of the Hand of Fu Manchu. The Hand of Fu Manchu by Sax Rohmer. Chapter 13 The Room Below. I ran into the sitting room to discover Nayland Smith craning out of the now widely opened window. The blind had been drawn up, I did not know by whom, and, leaning out beside my friend, I was in time to perceive some bright yellow object moving down the grey stone wall. Almost instantly it disappeared from sight in the yellow banks below. Smith leapt around in a whirl of excitement. "Come in, Petrie!" he cried, seizing my arm. "You remain here, Weymouth. Don't leave these rooms, whatever happens." We ran out into the corridor. For my own part, I had not the vaguest idea what we were about. My mind was not yet fully recovered from the frightful shock which it had sustained, and the strange words of the dying man, "the golden pomegranates," had increased my mental confusion. Smith apparently had not heard them, for he remained grimly silent, as side by side we raced down the marble steps to the corridor immediately below our own. Although, amid the hideous turmoil to which I had awakened, I had noted nothing of the hour. Evidently the night was far advanced. Not a soul was to be seen from one end of the vast corridor in which we stood, until, on the right-hand side and about halfway along, a door opened and a woman came out hurriedly, carrying a small handbag. She wore a veil, so that her features were but vaguely distinguished, and her every movement was agitated, and this agitation perceptibly increased when, turning, she perceived the two of us bearing down upon her. Nayland Smith, who had been audibly counting the doors along the corridor as we passed them, seized the woman's arm without ceremony and pulled her into the apartment she had been on the point of quitting, closing the door behind us as we entered. "Smith," I began, "for heaven's sake, what are you about?" "You shall see, Petrie," he snapped. He released the woman's arm, and pointing to an armchair near by, "Be seated," he said sternly. Speechless with amazement, I stood with my back to the door, watching this singular scene. Our captive, who wore a smart walking costume and whose appearance was indicative of elegance and culture, so far had uttered no word of protest, no cry. Now, while Smith stood rigidly pointing to the chair, she seated herself with something very like composure, and placed the leather bag upon the floor beside her. The room in which I found myself was one of a suite almost identical with our own, but from what I had gathered in a hasty glance around, it bore no signs of recent tenancy. The window was widely opened, and upon the floor lay a strange-looking contrivance apparently made of aluminium. A large grip, open, stood beside it, and from this some portions of a black coat and other garments protruded. "Now, madam," said Nayland Smith, "will you be good enough to raise your veil?" Silently, unprotestingly, the woman obeyed him, raising her gloved hands and lifting the veil from her face. The features revealed were handsome in a hard fashion, but heavily made up. Our captive was younger than I had hitherto supposed, a blonde, her hair artificially reduced to the so-called Titian tint. But despite her youth, her eyes, with the blackened lashes, were full of world-weariness. Now she smiled cynically. "Are you satisfied?" she said, speaking unemotionally. "Or," holding up her wrists, "would you like to handcuff me?" Nayland Smith, glancing from the open grip and the appliance beside it to the face of the speaker, began clicking his teeth together, whereby I knew him to be perplexed. Then he stared across at me. "You appear bemused, Petrie," he said with certain irritation. "Is this what mystifies you?" Stooping, he picked up the metal contrivance and almost savagely jerked open the top section. It was a telescopic ladder, and more ingeniously designed than anything of the kind I had seen before. There was a sort of clamp attached to the base, and two sharply pointed hooks at the top. "For reaching windows on an upper floor," snapped my friend, dropping the thing with a clatter upon the carpet. "An American device which forms part of the equipment of the modern hotel thief." He seemed to be disappointed, fiercely disappointed, and I found his attitude inexplicable. He turned to the woman, who sat regarding him with that fixed, cynical smile. "Who are you?" he demanded, "and what business have you with the Si Fan?" The woman's eyes opened more widely, and the smile disappeared from her face. "The Si Fan?" she repeated slowly. "I don't know what you mean, Inspector." "I am not an inspector," snapped Smith, "and you know it well enough. You have one chance, your last. To whom were you to deliver the box? When and where?" But the blue eyes remained upraised to the grim, tanned face, with a look of wonder in them, which, if assumed, marked the woman a consummate actress. "Who are you?" she asked in a low voice, "and what are you talking about?" Inactive, I stood by the door watching my friend, and his face was a fruitful study in perplexity. He seemed upon the point of an angry outburst, then, staring intently into the questioning eyes upraised to his, he checked the words he would have uttered and began to click his teeth together again. "You are some servant of Dr. Fu Manchu," he said. The girl frowned with a bewilderment which I could have sworn was not assumed. Then, "You said I had one chance a moment ago," she replied, "but if you referred to my answering any of your questions, it is no chance at all. We've gone under, and I know it, and I'm not complaining, it's all in the game. There's a clear enough case against us, and I'm sorry." Suddenly, unexpectedly, her eyes became filled with tears, which coursed down her cheeks, leaving little wakes of blackness from the make-up upon her lashes. Her lips trembled, and her voice shook. "I'm sorry I let him to do it. He'd never done anything, not anything big like this before, and he never would have done if he'd not met me." A look of perplexity upon Smith's face was increasing with every word that the girl uttered. "You don't seem to know me," she continued, her emotion growing momentarily greater, "and I don't know you, but they will know me at Bow Street. I urged him to do it, when he told me about the box today at lunch. He said that if it contained half as much as the Kurin treasure chest we could sail for America and be on the straight all the rest of our lives." And now something which had hitherto been puzzling me became suddenly evident. I had not removed the wig worn by the dead man, but I knew that he had fair hair, and when in his last moments he had opened his eyes, there had been in the contorted face something faintly familiar. "Smith!" I cried excitedly, "it is Lewison, Meyerstein's clerk. Don't you understand? Don't you understand?" Smith brought his teeth together with a snap and stared me hard in the face. "I do, Petrie. I have been following a false scent. I do." The girl in the chair was now sobbing convulsively. "He was tempted by the possibility of the box containing treasure," I ran on, "and his acquaintance with this lady, who is evidently no stranger to felonious operations, led him to make the attempt with her assistance. But—" I found myself confronted by a new problem. What caused his death? "His death?" As a wild hysterical shriek the words smote upon my ears. I turned to see the girl rise tottering from her seat. She began groping in front of her blindly, as though a darkness had descended. "You did not say he was dead?" she whispered. "Not dead? Not—" The words were lost in a wild peal of laughter. Clutching at her throat, she swayed and would have fallen had I not caught her in my arms. As I laid her insensible upon the settee, I met Smith's glance. "I think I know that too, Petrie," he said gravely. Chapter 14